It was a cold evening when he first heard the knock at his door. It wasn't the kind of polite knock you'd expect from a neighbor. It was hurried, like someone desperate, like someone with nowhere else to go. He hesitated, standing there with his hand on the doorknob, listening to the soft knocks repeating every few seconds. Part of him thought to ignore it. Strangers rarely meant good news, but something pulled at his curiosity. He opened the door slowly, and what stood there made his heart skip a beat. A tall woman, or at least that's what she looked like. At first, but the closer he looked, the more he realized she was not human. Her skin had a faint shimmer, as if starlight was trapped beneath it. Her eyes were large, almost too wide for her face, glowing faintly like soft lanterns in the night. She wasn't alone either. Two small figures peeked from behind her long robe. Children, but definitely not human either. They had the same glow in their eyes, the same shimmering skin, but their faces showed a mixture of fear and curiosity. She looked at him with a gaze so heavy with sadness that he couldn't speak. Then she did something he didn't expect. She bowed her head and whispered, "Please, my children need a father." The words didn't make sense at first. A prank, a misunderstanding. But her voice was serious, almost breaking. Confused, he asked, "Who are you?" "Why me?" She looked up, her eyes wet and trembling. "Because you saved my husband once," she said softly, "and now he is dead." That made even less sense. He had never met her, never left Earth, never saved any alien man. But she continued before he could question more. "You don't remember," she said, "because it wasn't you, but a part of you. My husband was created from your DNA. He was your clone, but born in my world." He stared, unable to believe such a thing. A clone? On another planet. His mind screamed that it was impossible. But then she reached into her robe and pulled out a necklace. On it was a small charm, and when she placed it in his hand, he froze. It was a face, carved with precision, and it was his face. The children stared at him silently, as if trying to decide if he was their father or just a stranger with a familiar face. The woman's shoulders shook slightly, but she stood tall. She explained how her planet was caught in endless wars, and how her husband, his clone, had fought bravely to protect them. But he was gone now, killed by those who wanted power, leaving her alone with two children in a world that punished widows. In her culture, without a mate, a woman was vulnerable, her children treated as burdens. She had no choice but to flee, searching for the origin of her husband, the human whose essence lived in him. "I traveled far," she said, "because I was told humans have compassion. I had nowhere else to go." The man stood there, still processing everything. It was too much, too fast. But as he looked at the children, their little glowing eyes filled with both fear and hope, something inside him stirred. He had lived alone for years, with no family, no visitors, and now this. A widow from the stars, asking him to be a father to children not of his flesh, but of his image. He wanted to say no, to shut the door and pretend it was a dream. But then she whispered, "Please, don't let them grow up hated and hunted. You may not be their father in blood, but you are the closest thing left." That night, he couldn't sleep. The stars above looked different, as if they watched and waited for his decision. He didn't know if he could be a father, but he knew one thing. The loneliness in their eyes was something he knew too well. And when the morning came, he opened the door again. They were still there, sleeping against the porch, huddled together. For warmth, he sighed, stepped forward, and said, "Come in. We'll figure this out." The widow smiled faintly, tears shimmering in her alien eyes. It was the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined. The house felt strange, with company inside. He had lived alone for so long that every sound, every movement from the alien widow and her children echoed too loudly in his small space. He watched them carefully, still unsure if he had made a mistake. The children stayed close to their mother, glancing at him now and then with wide eyes. They didn't speak his language, but their curiosity was clear in their expressions. The widow sat quietly on the couch, her long robe flowing around her, her shimmering skin catching the light like silk under the sun. She was not just different, she was beautiful in a strange, otherworldly way. After a while, he broke the silence. "Tell me everything. I need to understand." She looked up slowly and nodded. Then she began her story, her voice soft but steady. She spoke of her planet, a place with skies that shimmered purple and oceans that glowed at night. A place where her people once thrived until war broke them apart. Her husband, his clone, had been a leader, brave, kind, and fierce. But she explained something else, that her people had created him, her husband, from human DNA taken long ago. "Your world sent explorers," she said. "Many years ago. They didn't know what they left behind. A drop of blood. A piece of skin. It was enough." She explained that her scientists had cloned a human, believing that a warrior species like humanity could help end their wars. And it worked for a while. Her husband, the man who bore his face, had been a beacon of hope. She loved him not because he was alien to her, but because of his heart. "You may not have his memories," she said, "but you have his spirit. I see it in your eyes." He wasn't sure whether to believe her. It sounded like a fantasy. But the necklace she showed him, the carved face that looked just like his, felt too real to ignore. She said her husband had always wanted to visit the world he came from, to see Earth, to know what being human meant. But he died before that dream could come true. That's why she made the journey herself, carrying their children, hoping to find the original. "You're all I have left of him," she whispered. The children, sensing the tension, moved closer to him. One of them touched his hand gently, their fingers cool and soft. He looked down, feeling the small touch, and for a moment his heart ached. He saw loneliness in their faces, the same loneliness he carried for years. He couldn't push them away, even if every part of his mind told him to. But then he asked the question that bothered him most. "Why did you say your children need a father?" "Why me?" The widow looked away, her voice heavy. "Because in my world, a widow is nothing. Without a mate, my children have no protection, no status. They will be hunted, enslaved, or worse. I came here because I thought, maybe you would understand, maybe you would care." The truth hit hard. She didn't just want safety. She wanted a family, or at least the form of one. But was he ready for that? He barely knew how to care for himself, let alone to alien kids who didn't even speak his tongue. Yet, in their eyes, he saw a flicker of hope. It's a fragile thing, but real. He stood up, pacing the floor, trying to make sense of it all. He thought of his quiet life, his empty house, the years he spent talking to no one. Was this fate, chance, or just a cruel twist of destiny? Then she spoke again, barely above a whisper. "I don't want to force you. If you ask us to leave, we will. But please, just give them a chance to know kindness." Her words hung in the air, heavier than any weight he'd ever carried. He looked at the children again, their small hands, their wide eyes, their silent hopes, and he sighed. "You can stay." "But I don't know how to be a father," he admitted. She smiled faintly. "Neither do I know how to raise them alone." That night, for the first time in years, his house wasn't silent. The children laughed softly in the next room. The widow sat near the fireplace, staring into the flames, her face calmer than before. He watched them from the doorway, still, unsure of what he had agreed to, but knowing deep inside that something had changed. He wasn't just alone anymore. Whether he was ready or not, his life had taken a path that led far beyond his quiet little home, a path that started with A simple knock on the door and a plea from a widow of the stars. Days passed, and the strange new family slowly began to settle into an unusual rhythm. The man watched as the alien children moved around his home with quiet wonder, touching everything with careful hands, their wide, glowing eyes full of amazement at the small details he had long taken for granted. They did not speak his language yet, but their laughter was universal, echoing through the rooms like a soft melody that brought unexpected warmth to the once empty house. The widow stayed close to him, no longer just a visitor, but a presence he could not ignore. She cooked meals from her home world, the aromas strange yet comforting, and taught him about her culture, about honor, sacrifice, and love beyond the stars. Each day, the bond between them grew, small and fragile like a seed breaking through hard soil. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in fiery reds and golds, one of the children approached him quietly. The boy's glowing eyes met his, and in the simplest words he could understand, he asked, "Are you our father now?" The question stopped him cold. He looked down, searching for an answer he did not have. He was not their father by blood, nor by choice. But the weight of their hope rested on him like a stone in his chest. He wanted to say yes, to be the protector they needed, but fear held him back. What if he failed? What if he could not live up to a role meant for someone else? That night, he found himself restless, thinking about the widow's plea and the children's hopeful eyes. He had lived too long in solitude, convinced that no one could truly depend on him. But now, here they were, depending on him for safety, for love, for a future. It was a new kind of responsibility, heavier than any he had ever known. Days turned into weeks, and he began to notice small changes inside himself. The sound of children's laughter no longer grated on his nerves. It brought a strange comfort. The widow's presence, once unsettling because of her alien nature, became a quiet reassurance. He found himself protecting them instinctively, standing guard by the window at night, listening for any sign of danger. One afternoon, while fixing a broken fence post, the children watched him intently. They mimicked his movements, their small hands trying to use the tools he held, their faces lit up with joy at each small success. The widow smiled softly from the porch, her eyes filled with gratitude. She admitted that she had never hoped for a family like this, not in this way, but now she could not imagine life without it. The man's heart ached with a mixture of fear and hope. Fear that the peace they had found was fragile and could be shattered at any moment. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than the lonely man he once was. But the peace was not meant to last. One evening, as darkness fell and the children slept soundly, a shadow moved outside. Strange figures lurked beyond the trees, hunters from her world sent to find and capture the widow and her children. They were relentless, driven by a cruel power that saw the widow as a threat to their control. The man woke to the sound of muffled voices and the shimmer of strange weapons. Without thinking, he grabbed what he could, tools, sticks, anything to defend his home and the family he was beginning to love. The widow stood by his side, her own strength and skills. Surprising him, together they fought off the attackers, their movements sharp and desperate in the cold night air. The children woke and hid, their small bodies trembling but safe for now. After a long and exhausting fight, the hunters retreated, leaving behind silence and broken branches. The man looked at the widow, breathing hard, his hands shaking. "They will come back," she said quietly. "They always do." That night, as they patched wounds and comforted the children, the man made a decision. No longer would he be a passive protector. He would fight for this family, not because he was forced, but because he wanted to. He told her, "You're staying here. We'll face whatever comes together." The widow's eyes shone with relief and something deeper, a hope she had not felt in a long time. The children smiled in their sleep, unaware of the danger they had narrowly escaped, but feeling safe in a way they hadn't before. The man's life had changed forever. He was no longer alone. He was a protector, a guardian, and perhaps, one day, a father. The days after the attack were tense and filled with silent worry. The man barely slept, his eyes constantly scanning the dark edges of the forest that bordered his home. The widow and the children sensed his fear, but they tried to hide their own. They were strangers on a strange world, hunted by enemies he barely understood. He realized that protecting them meant more than just keeping his doors locked and his windows shuttered. It meant learning their ways and preparing for a fight he had never imagined. The widow showed him how to sense danger, how to read signs in the wind and shadows. She taught him to use her world's small energy devices, strange tools that could create shields or silent alarms. At first, he struggled, his human body unfamiliar with their technology, but he kept trying. The children watched and learned, their quick minds absorbing every lesson. Slowly, their small home became a fortress of sorts, traps hidden under leaves, alarms set around the perimeter, and safe rooms where they could hide. One evening, as the sky darkened, he heard the crunch of footsteps far too close. His heart pounded as he grabbed a simple but sharp blade the widow had given him. The hunters had returned, more numerous this time, their voices harsh and full of anger. The man took a deep breath and stepped outside, ready to face them. The fight was brutal. The hunters moved with deadly speed and strange weapons that hummed and glowed. But the man was not alone. The widow fought by his side, her movements graceful and fierce, her eyes burning with determination. The children were safe inside, but their small voices called out in fear. The man felt a new strength rising inside him, not just human strength, but something born of his love for this family. He used every skill he had learned, every trick and tool to push the attackers back. The battle lasted hours, but in the end, the hunters retreated once more. Exhausted and bleeding, the man and the widow stood together in the quiet night, their breathing heavy but victorious. "They will keep coming," she said softly, "till we find a way to stop them for good." The man nodded. He knew they could not run forever. They needed allies, help from somewhere, anyone, but who would believe them? Who would help a human protecting an alien widow and her children against a secret war on a distant planet? As the days passed, the man began to train harder. He practiced with the widow's weapons and learned more about her culture and her world. The children watched with bright eyes, eager to learn, and he felt a strange pride in their courage. One afternoon, while repairing a broken fence, the man heard a strange sound overhead. He looked up and saw a small ship hovering silently above the trees. It was not like the hunters' vessels. It was sleek and clean, marked with symbols he did not recognize. The ship landed softly in a clearing nearby, and from it came figures, tall, calm, and wearing uniforms. The widow stepped forward, cautiously. The visitors introduced themselves as rebels from her home planet. They had heard of the man who protected a widow and her children, and they wanted to help. They spoke of a secret war against the oppressive rulers who sent the hunters. They believed that with the man's help, they could turn the tide and free their world. The man was shocked. He was no soldier. He had no idea how to fight a war in space or lead a rebellion. But the widow looked at him with hope and faith. She said, "You have more power than you know. Your strength is not just in your body, but in your heart." The man thought about the children, about the family he was slowly becoming part of. He could not turn away. The rebels offered to train him, to teach him their ways, and to fight alongside him. The man agreed, knowing that his quiet life was gone forever. The children cheered quietly, sensing that their father was becoming a hero. And the widow smiled, knowing that together they might change the fate of many worlds. That night, as They prepared to leave for training. The man looked up at the stars. He realized that his life had changed in ways he could never have imagined, from a lonely human to a protector of a family from the stars. And maybe, just maybe, a savior of worlds. Life had changed in ways the man never expected. The quiet days were gone, replaced by training and preparation. The rebels taught him how to use new weapons, how to read star maps, and how to fight with strategy, not just strength. The widow stood by his side every step of the way, her confidence growing as he learned. The children watched eagerly, their bright eyes filled with pride and hope. They called him father more often now, in their soft alien words, and though he wasn't sure how to respond, he felt a warmth inside. The man realized he was not just protecting them anymore. He was becoming part of a family, one he had never dreamed of having. With each passing day, the bond grew stronger. They shared stories from Earth and from her planet, laughing over strange customs and surprising similarities. The man taught the children simple games from his childhood, and they showed him dances from their home. The widow cooked meals that blended both their worlds, filling the house with new smells and new life. Despite the joy, the danger remained. The hunters and the rulers of her planet had not given up. They sent spies and agents, trying to find their location, trying to break their spirit. But the man and the widow stood firm. Together with the rebels, they planned the next step, to lead a mission to free the oppressed and bring hope to many more like her family. One evening, as they sat watching the stars, the widow reached for his hand. "Will you stay with us?" she asked softly, not just as a protector, but as a father. He looked at the children playing nearby, their laughter like music in the night. For the first time, he didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said, his voice steady and full of promise. "I'm yours." The children ran to him, wrapping their small arms around his legs. The man felt tears in his eyes, tears of joy, of fear, of hope. He knew the road ahead would be hard, full of battles and sacrifices, but he was not alone. He had a family now. Together, they would face whatever came. The man, the alien widow, and her children became a symbol not just of survival, but of love that crossed worlds and species. They showed that family was more than blood. It was courage, loyalty, and the will to protect those you love. In that small home on Earth, under the watchful stars, a new story was being written, a story of a human who became a father to children from the stars, and who stood tall against darkness with a heart full of light. The arrival of the rebels had changed everything. The man found himself in a whirlwind of new faces, new ideas, and new battles that stretched far beyond the small home he had built. The rebels welcomed him with respect, seeing in him the courage and heart that had saved the alien widow and her children. They trained him harder than ever before, teaching him the secrets of their technology and the history of their fight against tyranny. The man learned to pilot small ships, to use energy weapons, and to strategize like a commander. Yet every night, no matter how far he traveled in his training, his thoughts returned to the children's innocent faces and the widow's hopeful eyes. He knew that what they needed was more than just protection. They needed a future. One evening, while in the rebel base hidden deep in the mountains of her homeworld, the man sat with the widow and the children in a small, quiet room. The children were tired from their own lessons, but their eyes were bright with curiosity. The widow told stories of her people's history, of their struggles and dreams, but also of hope and unity. "You carry the strength of two worlds," she told him, "Earth and ours. Together, we can be the light in the darkness." The man nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He was no longer just a human. He was a bridge between worlds, a symbol of hope to those who had none. But the war was not over. The rulers of her planet had learned of the rebel base's location and sent a powerful fleet to crush the rebellion once and for all. The man and the rebels, prepared for battle. The widow and children were moved to a secure location, protected by the bravest fighters. The man felt the heavy responsibility of leadership, knowing that the lives of those he loved depended on his decisions. The battle was fierce and filled with danger. Starships clashed in the dark sky, weapons fired in streaks of light, and explosions shook the ground beneath them. The man fought with all his strength and skill, leading his team with courage he did not know he had. In the middle of the chaos, he thought of his home on Earth, of the small house where the widow and children waited for his safe return. That thought gave him strength. When the battle ended, the rebels were victorious, but at a cost. Many had fallen, and the war was far from finished. Yet the victory was a turning point. The man knew their fight was just beginning, but he also knew they were not alone. Hope had returned, and with it, the chance for a new future. After the battle, the man returned to the widow and the children. Their reunion was quiet, but filled with deep emotion. He promised to protect them, not just as a fighter or leader, but as a father. The widow smiled, tears in her eyes, and the children hugged him tightly. Together, they looked toward the stars, ready to face whatever the future held. The man had become more than he ever dreamed, a protector, a partner, and a father to a family born among the stars. Their journey was far from over, but they would face it together, united by love and courage. The war was finally over, but the man knew that peace was just the beginning of a new challenge. The rebel victory had freed many from the cruel ruler's grip, but rebuilding a world torn by conflict was not easy. The widow and her children had grown stronger, but the scars of their past remained. Together, they returned to Earth, their true home now, a place of safety and new beginnings. The man's small house, once quiet and lonely, was now filled with laughter, light, and the strange but beautiful mix of two worlds. The alien children played in the garden under the stars, their glowing eyes reflecting the Earth's moonlight. The widow worked beside him, teaching him more about her culture and learning about his in return. It was not always easy. There were moments of misunderstanding, moments when the differences between their worlds felt too big. But love and patience bridged every gap. One night, as they sat together watching the stars, the man held the widow's hand. "We have come so far," he said softly. "I never thought I could have a family like this." She smiled, her eyes shining. "You gave us a home. You gave us hope. That is more than enough." The children ran to them, laughing and calling him father with joy that warmed his heart. He realized then that family was not just about blood or origin. It was about choosing to love, to protect, and to stand together no matter what. The man thought back to the night the widow first knocked on his door, scared and alone. How different life was now. He was no longer the lonely man he once was. He was a father, a protector, and a symbol of hope to two worlds. His journey had taken him from a quiet life on Earth to the stars and back, filled with battles, tears, and love. And now, under the quiet sky of his home, he finally felt at peace. The story of the alien widow, her children, and the human who became their father was a story of courage, sacrifice, and the power of love that knows no boundaries. It was a story that would live on, whispered among stars and shared in hearts. A story of a family forged in the fire of the unknown, united forever by the bond they chose. And as the stars shone brightly above, the man knew one thing for certain. No matter what the future held, they would face it together as a family. Because sometimes the greatest strength comes not from where you come from, but from who you choose to be.